In this 8-part series, we will examine the life of the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan. From a small-town Midwestern childhood, spent moving from town to town, growing up under the shadow of an alcoholic father, barely able to support his family, we will chronicle the future president's adolescent years. We will look at Reagan's early career as a radio announcer for the University of Iowa and the Chicago Cubs baseball team, and eventually moving on to have a successful acting career in Hollywood, starring in such films as Knute Rockne, All-American. We will also take a look at Reagan's role as president of the Screen Actors Guild, including testifying about communist activity within the film industry before Joseph McCarthy's infamous House Un-American Activities Committee. We will track Reagan's early political life, including his years spent as a staunch supporter of Franklin Roosevelt, before eventually switching parties and serving as the 2-term Republican governor of California during the unrest of the late 1960s. Highlighted by his most important speeches, the rest of the series will focus on the presidential years, with a look at the most significant events of Reagan's 8 years in the White House. Topics covered will include his attempted assassination by John Hinckley Jr., Reaganomics, and a push for smaller government, the Iran-Contra affair, and his most significant achievement, ending the Cold War. The series will close with a look at Reagan's final years, suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and a last look at the political and historical legacy of his presidency.
I think any conversation about President Reagan best begins with a bit of irony. How most people who so viscerally opposed him and his policies in the 60s would, in 20 years, be supporting him. Not everyone, of course, but many of the people that derided him would become sort of disciples of, if not him, what he represented. The pushback of so much of the activities, behaviors that they had formerly, advanced and enjoyed, and seeing now the excess, or seeing where they kind of brought you, and then turning away from that and resuming a more traditional kind of lifestyle or a traditional view of things, which Ronald Reagan epitomized, embodied. That's a great irony, which if you had told them in the 1960s, they would never have believed you. And yet that's kind of what happened.
Ronald Wilson Reagan, the 40th President of the United States, was born on February 6, 1911, in Tampico, Illinois. His father, Jack, was a salesman of Irish descent whose family came to America during the 1840s to escape famine. His mother, Nellie, was of Scots-English descent. Ronald had one sibling, an older brother named Neil, born in 1908. Ronald's father, Jack, was orphaned at the age of 6. He and Ronald's mother, Nellie, met in Jack's hometown of Fulton, Illinois, and married in 1904. Shortly after getting married, the couple moved to Tampico, where Ronald and his brother were born in the family's second-floor apartment, directly above a bakery. For the first 8 years of Ronald's life, the family moved from town to town, following his father's career as a salesman until 1919, when they finally returned to Tampico. Ronald's father, Jack, was known as a gifted storyteller whose natural charisma made him popular wherever he went. Unfortunately, Jack's alcoholism became his undoing, and he had a difficult time supporting his family. They never owned a house and were often short of money. Ronald would overhear his mother and father having loud arguments, and many times his father would disappear for days at a time. During the Depression, Jack found work with Roosevelt's WPA program, and this had a great influence on Reagan's strong support of FDR. Reagan was also greatly inspired by the novels of Harold Bell Wright and Horatio Alger. He spoke of their influence throughout his life. The stories seemed to mirror much of Reagan's life, showing that with enough hard work and fortitude, no matter how meager one's beginnings, anyone had a chance to be a success. To Reagan, it was the essential American story.
A lot of commentators of Ronald Reagan have drawn attention to the childhood home life that he experienced. I don't know how to actually weigh all of those kinds of judgments because it embodies a lot of views about the sort of psychological theories of how children react to alcoholic parents or an alcoholic father. But I don't know any Reagan commentator that doesn't talk a little bit about that and think it's, in some respects, a very important, influential aspect of his early years. I mean, to have a father who was abusive and an alcoholic, and what he had to witness and what he had to experience in the atmosphere of the home, and the proximity he developed with his mother emotionally as a consequence of that. The fact that Ronald Reagan, really won't be a drinker in his life. I mean, that is something he avoids. To what extent, as a father in his later years, he continued, not the abuse by any means, but maybe some of the distance that he experienced with his father. Certainly Ronald Reagan's children would tell you something about that. That, on the one hand, their dad's so friendly and he's so expressive and he's such a good guy and he's such a smoozer, but not with his children. That he was a remote figure, distant, and that, if that's just part of his generation or part of his particular psychological makeup with his father. A lot of people want to talk about that and comment on that because that is another element of his adult life that's intriguing and constant.
Ronald acquired the nickname Dutch as an adolescent from his father because of his plump stature and Dutch boy haircut. Though Ronald's father held a dim view of life, his mother Nellie was just the opposite, always able to see the best in people. Ronald credited his eternal optimism as well as his strong religious faith to his mother's influence. Ronald's mother was also responsible for introducing her son to the stage. They sometimes appeared together, reading stories or short speeches, and Nellie encouraged Ronald to try out for school and community plays. In 1920, the Reagans moved to Dixon, Illinois, another small Midwestern town not far from the Mississippi River. Ronald attended Dixon High School, where he became involved in sports and acting. His first job was as a lifeguard at the Rock River in Lowell Park, just outside of Dixon. As a lifeguard, Reagan performed 77 rescues. While it might have been known as the Jazz Age or the Roaring Twenties in cities like Chicago and New York. In Dixon, Illinois, it was a different story. It was a simple life, by nature conservative, emphasizing hard work and traditional Christian values. At best, there was only limited exposure to the trends and fashions taking place at the time in bigger cities. As was common with much of the Midwest in the 1920s, Dixon was divided along racial lines. Ronald and his mother Nellie took an active stance against this discrimination, even going so far as to offer food and shelter on a regular basis to those barred from the local inn because of their color.
You know, there's the old saying, the father, or the child is the father to the man. And it's a kind of helpful, useful model for evaluating the development of people from their childhood to their adulthood. And in Ronald Reagan's instance, you know, some of the experiences he had as a teenager, specifically as a lifeguard, were going to be very formative. I mean, on the one hand, I mean, here's a guy who, you know, is just physically fit, strong. He's noted for saving multiple people from drowning, keeps private sort of track of that record, but publicly, you never know about it. He's so modest. He's not the bragging kind of person. But how it, I think, translated into the development of his character was that, you know, he just began to believe in himself so strongly, just supreme self-confidence. And that, I think, just grew. I mean, and that's a powerful thing for a human being. I mean, oftentimes you'll find yourself in circumstances or rooms or circles where, you know, there's just not a whole lot of that present. And the person who has it stands out. And Ronald Reagan developed that very early on. You know, coming to his beliefs carefully, in his opinion, thoughtfully, deliberately. And then once he had them, he had them. And it would be very difficult for him to change on those core things that he was certain about and confident about.
After high school, with a partial scholarship, Reagan was able to enroll in Eureka College, where he became a cheerleader and majored in economics and sociology. During the school year, Ronald washed dishes in the school cafeteria to help offset the balance of his tuition. At Eureka, he was a member of the football team, captain of the swim team, and elected student body president. When the school wanted to cut faculty because of budget cuts, Reagan, in his role as student body president, organized a strike. He graduated from Eureka in 1932 with a degree in economics.
Ronald Reagan starts out his young adult life as a fan of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He and his family had lived through the Great Depression. They'd come to see the government, as many folks had, as saving them and saving the country. And Roosevelt was a hero for stepping in during the Great Depression and offering a path out of disaster.
After college, Reagan decided to strike out for Chicago, where he hoped to land a job in radio. Because it was the height of the Depression and he had no previous experience, he was unable to find work. He finally landed a job in Davenport, Iowa, announcing University of Iowa home games. before finally being hired by a local radio station, WOC, as a sports announcer. After a short time, Ronald managed to land a gig in Des Moines, doing real-time play-by-play for the Chicago Cubs, from accounts of the game coming in over the wire service. During this period, now old enough to vote, Reagan fell in behind the Democratic nominee, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who he believed best suited to lead the country out of the Depression. During a 1937 road trip to California with the Cubs, Reagan took a screen test with Warner Brothers that landed him a 7-year contract with the studio.
These little stories that you kind of love because they expose the person. When Ronald Reagan flew out to California for a screen test, that was really the first flight he'd had. And, we have to think back. I mean, not everybody's, flying is so common today. It wasn't always that way. It was a bumpy ride. He didn't fly again for 30 years. He was so scared of it, which I think is interesting. I mean, it's just kind of a fascinating little piece that not until he'll run for governor when you kind of have to, obviously, get in some planes. But he never really liked it. And to avoid it for 30 years is a pretty long time.
By 1939, after only 2 years in the business, had done 19 films. Over time, though, his roles began to improve, with major parts in several successful films, including King's Row, considered to be his best movie, as well as playing the Gipper in Knute Rockne All-American, probably his most famous role. It was during this time that Reagan met the actress Jane Wyman, who would become his first wife. They were married in January 1940 and had their first child, Maureen, in 1941. In 1942, 5 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, already an Army enlisted reserve, Reagan was called to active duty. Because of his nearsightedness, he was found unfit for overseas duty and ended up spending his military career with the 18th Army Air Force Base Unit, also known as the 1st Motion Picture Unit. By the end of the war, the unit had produced over 400 training films for the Army Air Force. In January 1944, Reagan was ordered to temporary duty in New York City to help promote the 6th War Loan Drive. While he was with the 1st Motion Picture Unit, he was indirectly involved in discovering Marilyn Monroe. His last stop was Fort MacArthur, California, where his active duty came to an end. Though Reagan never left U.S. soil during his service, he kept a film reel depicting the liberation of Auschwitz, believing that someday doubts would arise as to whether the Holocaust had occurred. After returning home from the war, Reagan served as the 3rd vice president of the Screen Actors Guild. In 1947, after 6 board members resigned in protest over a change in bylaws, Reagan was nominated and elected president of the Guild. He served 7 additional one-year terms, his last in 1959.
When he saw things in the Hollywood community that he felt were menacing, specifically with respect to communist infiltration, he was not the kind of person that would ignore it. He's not the kind of person to underplay it. I mean, this was something he knew he had to do something about, and he did, actively working against it, becoming an informant.
Ronald Reagan was one of the most vociferous opponents of communists, particularly in the acting guild in Hollywood. He came to be seen as part of the vanguard in the anti-communist wave in America in the 1950s.
We now know through the declassification and disclosure of a lot of the archives, the Soviet archives in the Venona files, that much of this stuff during the McCarthy era, which was labeled as a witch hunt by people like Ronald Reagan or McCarthy, where you go after supposed communists wherever they may be, in the government or the entertainment industry or wherever. It's funny that we use the witch hunt concept when there aren't witches, but what if there are? And all of the classification, exposure of those files says, communism was there. I mean, it wasn't a figment of imagination. They truly were in those vicinities, and they really were active. So Ronald Reagan, sensed that, took action against it, and throughout the rest of his life, represented an exceedingly stubborn resolve to combat the influence of communism wherever it might be, around the world, in America. I mean, this is one of the core principles of Ronald Reagan's political vision.
Reagan's first brush with communism came during the Hollywood blacklist era, with the rise of communist activity in the film industry. Both Reagan and his then-wife Jane Wyman provided names of suspected communist organizers to the FBI. Reagan also testified before Joseph McCarthy's House Un-American Activities Committee. After a second child died shortly after birth, the couple adopted a son, Michael, who was born in 1945. Reagan and Wyman divorced in 1949, after Reagan began devoting much of his time and energy to his new work with the Screen Actors Guild. In the 1950s, as Reagan's film career began to fade, he shifted to the new medium of television, becoming the host of General Electric Theater, a series of weekly dramas. His contract demanded that he visit GE factories 16 weeks out of the year and make 14 speeches a day during his visits. It was during his television work that he met his second wife, Nancy Davis. They married in 1952 and had 2 children, Patty and Ron.